There's been a lot of news in the guitar world recently. So much so that it feels like there's almost a new story every day. And that has been a little overwhelming, to the point now that we're missing stories, and some big ones too. Right now I'm going to, as far as I'm aware, break the news, and it isn't exactly news, it happened almost a week ago, just no one's reported on it. Google's AI overview will tell you point blank that it didn't happen. There it is. But that's not the case. The big lawsuit that happened between Behringer and Klon, the lawsuit that rocked the guitar industry a few months back, well, it's over. It's been dismissed. They've settled. So let's talk about it with a particularly scenic view. You've caught me away from home at the moment, but let's still talk about this lawsuit. Now, if you're not too familiar with the story, let me fill you in briefly on what's happened. There is an overdrive pedal called the Klon Centaur, and it has received almost legendary mythical status at this point, primarily because it's been used by a lot of famous players on a lot of famous songs. Now, they still make them, but they are hard to get. Klon produces them by hand, and it's one every couple of months. So obviously the demand outweighs the supply, and because of that, they sell for a lot of money. They tend to be around $4,000 plus. Depends on who's bidding at the time, but they are hard to get and expensive to get. So obviously there's going to be a lot of clones. Now, cloning pedals is pretty popular. It's what a lot of pedals are for the most part. They're based off something else. But there's one thing cloning a pedal's sound, there's another cloning how it looks, and especially copying what it's called. And Behringer did just that. Behringer released this year the Behringer Centaur. And Centaur is a trademark of Klon's, so obviously there was going to be some problems. Now, this isn't Behringer's first foray into the trademark dispute territory, and it probably won't be the last. But, well, put it this way, they have experience. But Behringer's core ethos is really taking a piece of gear, making it affordable, and mass producing it. So available for everybody at a low or relatively low price. That's the Behringer ethos. Now, how they do that is, well, a lot of the times reproducing other manufacturers' equipment. In this case, it was a Klon pedal. And I do think it's fair to say that in a lot of cases, Behringer tend to tread the line on what's acceptable trademark-wise. But anyway, Klon were not happy. Behringer were using the Centaur trademark. That was indisputable, and arguably the trade dress. That's how the pedal looked. They were using the same little horse centaur man holding a sword. It looked fairly close. And the big thing was that the Behringer logo wasn't even on the front of the pedal. So it didn't look like a Behringer. It was treading a fine line on the looks of the pedal, as well as the obvious name problem. Now, a few weeks after the suit was filed, somewhere in June, Behringer rebranded the Centaur, or the Behringer Centaur, into the Behringer Zentara. And there were some key changes. For one, they changed the name. It was from Centaur to Zentara. Close, but not the same as what they were being sued for. They also changed their little horse guy from holding a sword to holding a spear. He looked a little bit different. And they also put the Behringer logo on the front of the pedal. Now, this is where things got a little bit weird and, frankly, a little bit stupid, because guitar players being guitar players tend to make things that way. The Behringer Centaur, which, frankly, not many people cared about prior to the lawsuit, suddenly was very popular, because it was the concept of it being scarce, even though it wasn't necessarily scarce at all. Behringer produce on a massive scale. They have a factory that is essentially a city. It actually is referred to as Behringer or Music Tribe City, where employees live on campus. It is absolutely huge. Mass production is the name of the game. They don't make small runs of pedals. So these pedals weren't scarce to begin with, and that was reflected in people's orders. Because immediately, once Behringer rebranded, so did all the stores. And no one was selling a Behringer Centaur anymore, they were selling the Zentara. But if you bought a Zentara, you'd get a Centaur, because there were just so many of them. In fact, I'm not even sure the Centaura was ever made, because I've never seen any example of one physically. I've seen Behringer's stock pictures, but I'm not even sure if that's real or not. It looks a little bit more like a graphic than an actual real thing, but maybe it's just the way the picture was taken. The point is, I've never seen any customer receive a Zentara, but anyone who I saw ordered one received a Centaur, and then were they posting about how lucky they were. I don't think it was luck at all. I don't think they had any other option than getting the quote-unquote counterfeit pedal, or at least trademark infringing pedal. The second-hand market went wild. People were paying exorbitant amounts for a Behringer Centaur, which was hilarious because these were the same people who would have turned their nose up at a Behringer cheap, inexpensive pedal. They were now paying $200 or $300 for one because it had a particular picture of a horse on it. And it wasn't even rare. But legally speaking, Klon weren't happy with this either, and actually amended their complaint on the 16th of July to mention this. Behringer's rebranding wasn't a deal with Klon. Klon didn't know that this was happening. They just rebranded, I guess, to try and keep the flow of products going. But in reality, what was selling was Centaur pedals, not Zentara pedals, even if they are branded Zentara. Klon were not happy with this at all. And I guess fair enough. They amended their complaint and were hoping for up to $2 million per counterfeit mark. And that's really all we heard from it. People could still purchase a Zentara, and everyone received a Centaur. The courts tend to take years. But then, just last week, September 29th, it was filed a voluntary dismissal without costs to any party. And that really is big news. It means the lawsuit is over. And officially, we don't know anything more than that. Unofficially, we can kind of assume a couple of things. This was likely a settlement deal between Behringer and Klon. An agreement made between the two parties. Now, it could be monetary, it could be just an agreement to stop certain things. We don't know, and we likely never will know. In these sort of settlements, non-disclosure is almost always included. At present, there's been seemingly no acknowledgement from Behringer or Klon about this publicly. And remember, this happened almost a week ago at the time of recording this video. But there is one pretty big telltale that we can see from Behringer's website. They've rebranded the pedal again. It started out as the Behringer Centaur, then became the Behringer Zentara, and it's now become the Behringer Zentara. And that name is likely a big enough change to not confuse anybody about anything. In fact, I'd go to the point that there are plenty of other Klon clones that are named much closer to Centaur than Zentara is. So that name change is likely something to do with Klon agreeing to drop this case, but that is an assumption. It might not be the case, but logically I think it probably is. Another thing that I noticed is that if you go onto certain retailers, some are listing a Zentara, some still have it as the Centaura, but it seems common enough that none of them have it in stock, which might be either it's just sold out, or it could be that the part of the deal was that they were no longer allowed to sell the units that say Centaur on them, because sure, people were buying the Centaura, but again, I've never seen one in real life. I've never seen a picture of one in real. I've never seen anyone with one. Everyone got a Centaur that I know of who bought a Centaura. So perhaps the deal was that retailers could no longer sell the Centaur pedals. And, but again, just an assumption. But everybody is out of stock at present and it's all pre-order. And I just want to get in here before the market goes crazy and say, there's a likelihood, if you've got a feeling that you just want to go out and grab one of these, like one of the ones that say Centaur because it's rare. One, you probably didn't care about this until I reminded you about it. Two, it's not really that rare. Behringer are not in the business of making small runs of anything. Everything is mass-produced and released at a low price point. That is quite literally why Behringer exists. That is their core business ethos. These are not rare. Sure, the indication of what it's worth and its valuation is what people list them at eBay. But I would remind you about the Bad Monkey. The Bad Monkey price spike, and now it's back to relatively normal and what it actually sells for. People still have listed sky high, but people aren't buying sky high. They're putting in an offer and people are accepting low prices. That will happen with any Behringer Centaur that exists because there's so many of them. People will sell them. because most people didn't buy them for the sound at all. They bought them for the supposed rarity or scarcity when it really wasn't, and still technically might not be. We actually don't know whether if you buy a Zentara, you might get a Centaur or not. We don't know that. But what we do know is that hype sells, and also hype dies down. So if you really, really, really want one that has a particular picture of a horse on it and a particular name on it, I'd just wait until no one cares anymore, because it will happen. But that's the video. If you want to catch up on the story as it happened, or my critique on the insane pricing on these particular pedals, you can see the other older videos. I've probably linked them here, and you can probably subscribe here. And there's a hype button apparently on YouTube now that is supposed to work. It's a new feature, so I would ask that you use that maybe. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.